Hello, everybody. This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast, episode 33 of the Church Fathers. Unfortunately, Logos is experiencing technical difficulties and is currently unable to join us. I don't know if he'll figure that out before the show's over, but there's still a show to do. So we are going to be covering chapters 91 to 100 of the dialogue with Trypho. When God blessed Moses, he in the same manner blessed Jacob. He foreshadowed the cross. When it is said, his horns shall be like a unicorn, this is the point of the cross, since the horns of the unicorn represent the cross. The same figures. The cross is not only for the salvation of the nations, but also for the destruction of Amalek, as Moses, with his outstretched hands, overlooked Joshua, who destroyed the Amalekites. The cross is also represented in the brazen serpent that was constructed by Moses to save Israel. Isaiah prophesied that the serpent would be put to death by the sword, which is Christ. So a couple things here. This is using the King James translation, which does translate it as unicorn, but it's actually ox. It's one of those strange translation errors that occurred. He's again playing on the idea of Joshua and Jesus having the same Hebrew name, Yeshua. The idea then that the serpent will be put to death by the sword. So, of course, he's referring to Revelation, where the sword coming out of the mouth of Christ is his word, which destroys his enemies. And tying that into this, the serpent being the serpents that bit the Israelites in the desert, who then looked upon the serpent that was in the bronze statue. So there's that. Moving to chapter 92. One cannot understand Scripture unless God gives man the grace to understand. Justin again points to the righteous men before Abraham, who were not circumcised, but were saved by God. He discusses again how Israel fell into idolatry. Abraham was saved by faith while uncircumcised. So are all Christians. God made allowance for Jewish festivals and feast days in order to point to Christ. Christians believe that even the foolish Jews can be pointed to Christ and gain repentance. 93. God gave all men a basic moral sense. They know that adultery, fornication, and homicide are sin. When men do commit these sins, they still have the knowledge of it, with the exception of those who are, according to Justin, 1, demon-possessed, 2, corrupted by false education, 3, by bad customs, and 4, by bad institutions. Well, I think modern-day America is probably all 4 of these. Such evil men are not willing to submit to what they inflict on others. Now, this is an implicit reference to the golden rule, right? Do unto others, you have them do unto you. If you do something to other people that you would not want done to you, then that's considered, a transgression of one of the most basic definitions of justice. Christ contrasts this way of life with love of God and love of your neighbor as yourself. The Jews, according to Justin, do not love God because they worship idols in the Old Testament and then crucified his son. The Jews cannot answer Christians on these points, but instead ask meaningless questions to fill the time. They are at a loss for arguments when they come across a firmly established Christian. Well, it's more than that. Whenever I go up against somebody who's not, as firmly established as myself in any debate, it usually doesn't end well. There's a more general principle here that Justin is appealing to. 94. Justin asks, was Moses unrighteous for building the bronze serpent, even though he commanded no graven images be constructed? Justin argues that this was a mystery that pointed to Christ, that the crucified Messiah would break the fangs, wicked deeds, idolatries, and unrighteousness of the serpent. This is the reason why Moses made such a thing, and ordered the Israelites to look upon it for their salvation from the raging serpents. The Jews in this chapter say they agree and say that their own rabbis do not have an answer for this riddle, and that Justin seems good. Justin, God commanded the brazen serpent to be made, and Moses is still blameless in like manner. No curse lies upon Christ for being on the tree. Now, what's interesting about this here is you'll see a lot of fatuous arguments by Catholics and Orthodox. So, well, what about the bronze serpent, bro? Moses made the bronze serpent. And they'll also point to like the pomegranates and lions in the temple. Well, the point is what we're seeing here, and what Justin doesn't have the word for yet, is Kierkegaard's teleological suspension of the ethical, which is, in his example, is Abraham and Isaac, where Abraham is commanded by God to kill Isaac. But of course, Abraham does not kill Isaac, and God provides a way out. But here, when Moses builds the brazen serpent, which does point to Christ and has this Christological implication, one, it's commanded by God, so that's a whole separate case all in itself. But this is just what Kierkegaard would call the teleological suspension of the ethical. And so notice what Justin doesn't say. Oh, yeah, because Moses built the bronze serpent, Christians have all these icons in their churches. No. In fact, he sees that there's a superficial problem here because Moses said that you should not make graven images, an assessment that Justin is agreeing with in arguing that this was just a unique suspension of normal rules. So it's interesting that this is, I think, the first time we've seen this issue come up, the issue of, say, something like the bronze serpent or the cherubim, something that was constructed by Moses or later Solomon in the temple. And Logos is here. Hello, Logos. You're muted. Well, he unmutes himself. We'll keep going. Let's see here. 95. Okay. On chapter 95, all mankind is under a curse. For Moses said, a man is cursed if he does not completely keep everything written in the book of the law. If the Jews are under the curse for not keeping the entire law, even though they try, how much more are pagans under a curse for worshiping idols? In order to save mankind, Christ took this curse upon himself, but this was not disobedience to God, the Father's will, since he was the one who enjoined this upon Christ. The Jews did not practice piety when they slew Christ. If the Jews repent of their sins and serve Christ, they will be saved. If you curse Christ, how will you escape the curse of Moses and all of mankind? Second. And, okay. So here he's making reference to the fact that Moses said, hello?
Hi.
Hey, Logos. So you have any comments so far?
The only major comment I had with this part of the section was, I thought it was funny when he said, Christ is obviously not cursed hanging on the cross because he did what the Father asked him to do, basically. And it's like, well, if you're a Christian, you're going to believe that. But if you're a Jew, you're probably going to contend with that. So it just seems interesting that he'd go that route.
Well, did you catch the part where I read about chapter 94?
No, I just got on when you started reading 95.
Oh, well, this will explain it, right? So just a brief recap to help explain this point to you, Logos. He says, Moses built the brazen serpent. Was he unrighteous? Because Moses had earlier commanded not to construct graven images.
Oh, yeah, I did read that part. I thought that was really interesting. I didn't understand the whole story about the serpent and the images and stuff like that. But
here's the point. He's saying to Trypho the Jew that Moses could still do that and not be in violation of God's righteousness. One, because God commanded him to, but two, because the bronze serpent pointed to Christ. And so that ties into 95 in the sense that this is a problem. So what Justin is pointing out is if you're going to say Christ is cursed because he hung on a tree, merely by that fact, Moses is unrighteous because he built the brazen serpent.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting, right? Because it's even worse. If people like capture you in your sleep and they, quote, hang you from a tree, you didn't do anything wrong. You were minding your own business, ostensibly trying to sleep. So are you cursed because some people did something to you, or are you only cursed if you did it on purpose?
Right. We were just about to get into curses in general and how curses affect you. So that might actually explain a little bit more. But here's the thing to me that is interesting, right? Notice what Justin doesn't say, Logos. He doesn't say, no, Trypho, it's okay. We have all these icons that are hidden under the floor. Don't worry. Like, Moses totally was chill with this. No, he's like, no, this is a problem that needs to be resolved. How do we resolve this problem? How do we resolve this problem? He's conceding the point. And the word that we would use today that he doesn't have is Kierkegaard's concept of the teleological suspension of the ethical. which what like Kierkegaard means by that is that he points to Abraham and Isaac, that story. And he says that sometimes for the higher good of religion, you might have to do something that would offend ethical senses.
Right.
So Kierkegaard has this tripartite view of morality: the aesthetic, the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious, where each one is more comprehensive in its understanding of ethics. And that's what Moses is doing here when he builds the bronze serpent. It's a teleological suspension of the ethical, which, again, Justin wouldn't have had that terminology, but we do now. Okay, 96. When Moses wrote, "Cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree," which is not meant that Christ himself was cursed. This answers your question. But we're foretold of what you, the Jews, would do to Christ. We all say that this has come to pass. The Jews curse Christ in their synagogues and hunt down Christians and kill them for confessing the name of Christ. You should turn to Christ. Christians would rather endure death than forsake Christ. Christ taught us to pray for our enemies and do good to them. God is merciful to all, causing the sun to shine and rain to fall on all, righteous and unrighteous. So it's not that Christ himself is cursed, but that, so 95, he says that, okay, all men are under a curse, okay? And that's both Jews and Gentiles. That curse has to be dealt with somehow. And Christ submits to the will of the Father to accept the consequences of that curse, but himself not being cursed, in the sense, like he's not morally at fault. He's not cursed for some moral fault of himself.
Right. I mean, I guess in general, like suppose it wasn't Christ. Suppose it was just anybody. Like I don't know, you were living in Jerusalem and some, I don't know, Canaanites or something like kidnapped you from your bed and crucified you, and the people found you dead, the next morning. Are you cursed because somebody else did this to you? Or would you only be cursed if you did it on purpose, like worshiping, say, a graven image or something?
Yeah. I would say that I think this was interesting, right? Is hanging on the tree in this context is if we're talking about like properties, is a sort of like curse making property, in the sense that the intent of the one doing it is trying to curse you. The question then is, will you be cursed? And I think the way out is if you're of a pure heart. Of course, Christ was of a pure heart.
Okay. I mean, yeah, if it's people trying to put a curse upon you, then I don't see how Trypho is going to convince a Christian that there's any sort of curse that could be put on Christ here. If he's the Son of God and he's doing everything the Father wanted him to do, like what curse is going to manifest?
No, it's not that. Yeah, it's not that Christ is cursed in the sense of, like, say, Noah's son Ham, but that he's choosing to bear the consequences of the curses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I try to understand that. It felt like it was mixing two different things. It's like I understand the crucifixion idea that Christ is taking on the sin of all mankind. It's the hanging from the tree portion specifically. It's like Christ has this unique curse because of the way he was killed. Like suppose that Christ was like beheaded. Suppose it was like French Revolution Christ. He was beheaded by a guillotine or something, right? He would still do that willingly if it would take on the punishment of all human beings, right? He'd still remove our curse by volunteering to die that way. But there's something unique supposedly about this hanging on a tree thing that I don't fully understand. That's supposed to like curse Christ himself. I don't see it.
Right. Okay. So let's look at this. This is okay. For the statement in the law, curses anyone that hangs on a tree, confirms our hope, which depends on the crucified Christ, because he who has been crucified is cursed by God. Not because he who has been crucified is cursed by God, but because God foretold that which would be done by you and by those like you, to whom who do not know that this is he who existed before all. So it sounds like what Justin is trying to say here is that the curse is lying on the Jews for doing this.
Right. But it seems like the verse everybody's talking about, the Moses curse, is cursed as anyone that hangs on the tree, not cursed as anyone who hangs someone else from a tree.
Yeah, well, I know that we've seen this with Justin before. Sometimes he gets a little too allegorical.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why I don't think this is a true dialogue. Like, if I'm the Jew in this conversation, Justin flipped it like that, I'd be like, whoa, hold on, rewind this conversation 15 seconds ago.
Yes. Well, like for example, throughout the Old Testament, there are rebels basically who are defeated and hung from trees, which is a sign of the curse on them. And that's not who Christ is. He's not one of those. So
Yeah, and that's an interesting way of thinking about it too, because there are a couple ways you can interpret this, I think, fairly. Cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree. Are they cursed because they hang from a tree, or are they hung from a tree because they're cursed? So, if they're cursed because they hang on the tree, well, Christ is in trouble unless God told him to do it, so you have to find a loophole or whatever. But if they hang on a tree as a sign that you have cursed them or they are cursed, well, then that just fits nicely in the Christian story, because the entire idea is that Christ is bearing the curse of all humankind, so of course he's cursed. That's why he's there.
yeah. I'm trying to look up the where Moses, where the section from Moses is being quoted, and okay. So it's Deuteronomy 21, 22, and 23. If a man has committed a sin deserving of death, he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree. His body should not be removed on the tree, but you shall surely bury him that day, so that you do not defile the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. For he who is hanged is accursed of God.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like they're put on the tree because they've already done something wrong,
Yes.
not the hanging on the tree is itself the curse being bestowed
Yes.
upon
Yes.
them. Okay, well, yeah, in that case, the entire Christian story is that Jesus was here to take the curse for all mankind in the first place, and so yeah, he's taking our place as the ultimate wrongdoer, basically.
Yes.
So now I understand the rebuttal.
Good. Let's go back to where we were at 97. Aaron and Hur held up Moses' arms until evening. This prefigures Christ on the cross, and that he was on the cross until evening. David and Isaiah for further evidence. He cites Psalm 3, 4-5, and Isaiah 65, 2. Christ's resurrection was predicted in Isaiah 53, 9, and by David in Psalm 22, 16-18. Christ would be crucified, would have nails driven into his hands and feet. Lots were cast for his garments. No one but the Christian Christ fulfills all these prophecies. And he's referring to other Jews who might make claim to that. 98. Justin quotes Psalm 22 in its entirety to demonstrate that it refers to Christ becoming forsaken by God, being surrounded by his foes, his heart melting, trusting in God to save him. I mean, this is pretty straightforward, classic Christian exegesis of the passage. Let's see, 99. Christ quoted a portion of Psalm 22 when he died. Christ asked God the Father to have this cup, crucifixion, pass from him. This is not to be understood as if Christ did not know the fact of the matter, but for our sake. When God asked Adam if he had eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or Cain, where Abel was, it is not to be assumed that God did not know the answer to these questions, but for our sake. That being for our knowledge and edification, Christ was saying that ignorance was not on his side, but on those who would seek to kill him. Any thoughts, Logos?
Nope, not for this one.
Okay, last one, 100. Christ is both called Jacob and Israel. The prophecies of Joseph and Judah fall on Christ, but not them alone. Justin cites the New Testament where Christ states, "No man knoweth the Father but the Son." Christ is the first begotten of God before all creation. He was born of a virgin, connecting him to the patriarchs. The Son of Man must suffer many things. Christ is descended from David through Mary. The fathers. Now, this is important. You've asked me this question multiple times before already, but here Justin is answering your question, Logos. The fathers of women were also the fathers of the children their daughters bore. Christ is the Son of God in that he predated creation. Christ is called wisdom, day, east, sword, stone, rod, Jacob, and Israel. The transgression of a woman, Eve, is countered by the faith of a woman, Mary. Through Mary's obedience, Christ was conceived, and God destroyed the serpent and his works and brings life to those who trust in him. Now, where was it? 100. It says specifically here the thing about Mary. Here we go. Wait a minute. Yeah, and he said then that he was the Son of Man, either because of his birth by the Virgin, who was, as I said, of the family of David, and Jacob and Isaac and Abraham, or because Adam was the father of both himself and of those who were first enumerated, from whom Mary derives her descent. So that's the Christian answer there.
Okay, right. So Christ predates creation. But Christ is the Son of Man only when he's birthed into the world.
Well, okay, so the technical way would be is that the Logos is the second person of the Trinity that existed before creation. That's what we call that aspect of who Christ is. And then Christ the man is descendant from David through Mary.
Got it. Okay, so he didn't pre-exist with some kind of human characteristics
No.
prior to creation. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But also you would ask the question of lineage, since he doesn't have an earthly father, how is he descended from David? Well, he's descended through David through Mary.
Just mother. Yeah, you told me that, but now we're seeing the answer here, so that makes sense.
No, but I thought that was rather interesting, right? Because that was a question you'd been asking, and Justin already provides the answer. We just hadn't got there yet.
Exactly. Yeah, this thing's kind of out of order a little bit.
It's kind of all over the place, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's kind of all over the place, and so yeah, the main things here are a lot of typologies of Christ. He likes to focus in on Moses and the Amalekites and the arms extended outward like a cross. Yeah, that's definitely one of the classic ones. That's like 2 or 3 times in the 10 chapters we've read today. Jesus-Joshua connection, because in Hebrew it's the same name, Yeshua. And then the idea about the curse, that, curses. Also, Jesus said to the Pharisees that they circumcise on the Sabbath, profaning the Sabbath, but are not judged. Right, because on the Sabbath, you're not supposed to do customary work, but you're supposed to circumcise on the 8th day. So that takes priority. And Jesus is telling, Jesus, when he says this to the Pharisees in regards to them kvetching about him healing people, is saying, well, look, even you guys know this when it comes to some divine ordinance, that might come into conflict. There's a higher order of operations to appeal to. And that concept of a higher order of operations is when what we would call the teleological suspension of the ethical, which is what the brazen serpent falls into. And Justin would use what we would now call that as the explanation.
Makes sense.
Again, I just got to say, these pesky Protestants, they keep on changing what the church fathers wrote. I mean, heaven forbid you not use the brazen serpent as a justification for, building icons of Mary. What do you know?
Now, that's something interesting that I thought too. I never heard that before, where the synergy there between Eve ostensibly being the one to ruin paradise, and then Mary being the one to kind of like defeat the serpent and reclaim it through obedience or whatever. I'd never heard it put that way before.
Yeah, that's the earliest reference to any sort of teaching on Mary. And I think the other thing that's interesting about that is how muted it is, right? It's not what you would expect given what we've seen today, especially with the Catholic Church.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see the progression of that.
Right. There is a progression, but we're just supposed to pretend that there isn't. So is there anything else you want to add to this, or was it clear enough, or did I clarify everything enough for you?
Yeah, no, this one was pretty clear after I had some questions answered. It wasn't the whole hangs on a tree is cursed thing. I'm like, that's just like a mean thing you do. You could hang anybody on a tree and curse them. That just seems awful. Like that rule seems kind of arbitrary and capricious. But no, if you're already a criminal, hanging on the tree is just showing you're a criminal. Okay, that makes sense. The other interesting thing I was thinking about while you're talking about this is the Jews that persecuted Christ had to know these prophecies were floating around. They had to. Like, if I was a Jew and I was afraid of, this guy controlling the narrative basically post death, the last thing I'd want him to do would be to be crucified. I'd be like, listen, Roman guy, listen, we'll kill him in our own way. We're just gonna like bury him alive or something. We'll drown him. We'll do anything other than crucify him, because apparently there's like a whole hotbed of prophecies here.
Well, see, they couldn't do that because the Romans didn't allow the Jews to execute prisoners.
Really?
Yeah. Well, it's in the gospel. Let me look it up. The Romans were not allowed to. The Romans did not allow the Jews to execute people this way.
See, that's funny. I thought Pontius Pilate washed his hands of it. So he's just like, mob justice, you guys do whatever you want. They're like, all right, and of all the things we can do to this guy, we're going to crucify him.
Let's see. Right. Well, okay, maybe it's not directly in the Gospels, but the Romans didn't allow the Jews to do capital punishment. They were the ones that did that. And so that their preferred way of doing that was through crucifixion.
That seems weird. If I'm a Jew then, at the time, and I'm afraid of this guy's teachings getting notoriety, I would just not capital punishment then. Why wouldn't they do to him what they did to John and just like lock him up for the rest of his life or something? It seems so weird that they gave this guy the one thing that he wanted. It's like everybody in the story is stupid. I don't know.
well, but okay. So the reason why the Jews wanted to kill him was they were afraid that if they let him keep preaching the kingdom of God, the Romans would get upset and take away their station within the realm.
Really? I mean, he's preaching like, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, mind your P's and Q's, don't rock the boat. The Jews are talking about like revolution, taking back their temple, all this stuff, and Christ is the one that's going to upset the apple cart. That's really strange.
Well, it is, but that's what they thought. So this is from John 11. Beginning in verse 49, and one of them, Caiaphas, being high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all, nor do you consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and not the whole nation should perish. Now this he did not say on his own authority, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not only for that nation only, but also that he would gather together in one the children of God who were scattered abroad. Then from that day on, they plotted to put him to death.
Huh.
Now, of course, that's from the Gospels, and a Jewish source would say, I don't buy that. But that's just that's the nature of the division between Jews and Christians.
Interesting. I'll have to mull over that for a bit. These are dimensions to the thing I just haven't even thought about reading the New Testament to the extent that I did.
No, well, that's why we're doing the series, right, Logos?
Yeah, it's really interesting.
All right, cool. Well, thanks again, Logos, and everybody who tuned in, all 13 of you. This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.